Hello, my sweets, my darlings, my everythings. Welcome back, lost the accent. Welcome back to the second lesson in transurfing, okay? First, before we get into it, I just want to say thank you so much for the love and the positive energy that you've been sending in the comments in the last video. It means so very much to me. I really, really appreciate it. Now, have a seat, grab some tea and some crumpets, because this class is going to be a bit of a long one, but oh, so important because we're doing it on pendulums. If you've ever wondered why your life feels like it can derail so easily sometimes, and why negativity spreads so fast, and why society feels like it's running on fear, drama, and conflict, well, it's because there are energetic entities that are feeding on our attention. But don't worry. Most people, though, have no idea that their thoughts, emotions, and personal choices even aren't actually theirs all the time. They're being pulled, manipulated, and fed on. Now, these invisible forces, they're shaping our relationships, our desires, our moods, and our identity, even the lifelines that we end up waking up on every morning. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. These forces, like I mentioned, are called pendulums, or in ancient times, or even occult circles, they're referred to as egregores. They're the hidden engines of the matrix, the structures that keep humanity running or looping on the same timelines and repeating the same patterns and living far below their potential. Once we understand pendulums, you understand why your life feels the way that it does. Once you master pendulums, you become free in a way that most people never will. You know how transurfing is all about learning how to choose your highest lifeline? Well, in order to learn how to choose, we must first learn how to decline. And so, in today's class, we're going to explore these ideas. What is a pendulum and how it influences us? How do pendulums draw energy from us to fuel their growth and survival? How they can send you down truly destructive lifelines, and I've been there. How to free yourselves from them, of course. And then finally, how to use pendulums to make your dreams come true. Now, Carl Jung once noticed that the art that we create reflects the unconscious and the collective unconscious back to us. Now, I recently watched The Matrix, and the opening scene hit me harder than ever. The story goes like this, right? Humans created AI and the robots, and then AI evolved and then turned on its creators, and a war began. Now, in a desperate move, humanity blacked out the sun and the skies, right? Because the robots or the machines, they were running on the sun as its main energy source. But the machines were smart, so they adapted, and they realized that humans themselves generate massive amounts of energy. So they built the Matrix, a simulated reality to trap humanity's consciousness, keeping everyone asleep while they fed on their life force. Now, when I saw that, I realized that's exactly what pendulums do. Pendulums are informational systems, social, political, religious, digital, that feed on our attention and emotion. They don't want us to be awake, they want us asleep and reactive. And just like the machines in the Matrix, pendulums keep us plugged into the system, fighting, scrolling, arguing, consuming, anything that generates emotional energy, so they can basically just feed on us. Most people, though, never realize that their battery's in someone else's system, and the only way out is to wake up. So, now, let's get into the class. From childhood, we were sort of taught to follow others, to serve our parents, our schools, our jobs, our country, or some sort of greater cause. And we learned to put everything and everyone above ourselves, in front of ourselves. And so most people kind of carry this sense of duty and responsibility and guilt that keeps them serving certain groups or systems instead of their own true desires. When a group of people start thinking and acting the same way, they form a structure or system. As more people join, it grows stronger. Over time, it begins to enforce its own rules and can eventually gain control over large parts of society. On a material level, though, the structure looks like what you know, a group of people united by common goals and similar-ish material objects and behavior. You know, buildings, desks, laptops, etc. But on an energetic level, a structure forms when a group of people share identical or similar-ish thought energy and creates a unified current that then results in an independent, informational-based energy known in transurfing as a pendulum. If the current is held onto long enough, is strong enough, and has enough adherents, enough people within the structure, eventually it begins to become autonomous and subjugate its laws to the very people who created it, right? Just like in the Matrix. As I mentioned, this is not a new concept. It's been known for ages in esoteric circles and occult circles known as egregores, i.e. also thought forms. Essentially, the pendulum is an egregore, but the concept of an egregore does not fully reflect the entire range of possible interactions between individuals and these energy-based information structures. Pendulums play a much greater role in people's lives than anyone might like to think or can even imagine. Even Napoleon Hill, the guy who wrote Think and Grow Rich, mentioned something similar and knew about this idea. He said, "No two minds ever come together without thereby creating a third, invisible, intangible force which may be likened to a third mind." Examples of collective pendulums that are right in our face are like religions, governments, corporations, activists and charities, schools and universities, and the animal kingdom. They make up our world. Our world is run on pendulums. It's part of the structure and fabric of our reality, like it or not. It's just the way things are. Now, you might be surprised that everything on the list is a pendulum. It's because any structure created and sustained by collective thought energy and emotion becomes a pendulum. Any living being that radiates energy on a shared frequency of some kind will eventually create an energetic pendulum. Now, energetic pendulums in nature are any sort of animals that kind of come together in a herd, right? Bacteria colonies, any sort of population of living creatures, schools of fish, herds of animals, forests, prairies, hills, any organized group of living things. Why we say hills or mountains, you might have even heard like in whether it's Japanese cultures where a mountain might have a spirit. Essentially, it's a pendulum. Essentially, a pendulum is a spirit. Now, a school of fish is a perfect example of a pendulum in nature. The whole group moves as one living being. When something startles them, right, they all instantly turn and move all in the same direction. Now, it's not each fish reacting to the next, or else that would look like a traffic jam. Instead, the whole school together as a single unit moves, right? Now, some might think or consider that the fish are communicating via telepathy, but that's not the case, because if you have a fish that's alone and it gets scared, it's the one that shifts and jitters, and the fish beside it or around it don't do the same thing. And so there's an idea that there might not be even a message being transmitted at all. Another great example are birds, particularly it's these starlings, which kind of move in these mesmerizing, synchronistic dance that's referred to as a murmuration. It's incredible and beautiful, and particularly when you put this by or to classical music. Ant colonies are also very much a wonderful example. Now, this one over here is 10 tons. It's got highways, rooms if you look closely, and it has no like centralized boss or hierarchy, so to speak, but everything moves beautifully and wonderfully like a complete organized system. Now, I know they communicate via pheromones and chemtrails, but that alone does not express how information seems to spread instantaneously through the whole colony. These ants are capable of achieving marvelous things. Every living being is a small source of energy and what's referred to as an individual pendulum. But when many individuals start thinking and acting in the same way, they merge into a larger collective pendulum. This group pendulum becomes a powerful source that sits above its members and influences now how they think and behave. A group pendulum becomes its own beast and takes on a life of its own. It creates rules to keep people inside and pull new people in, and it grows and operates by its own laws. And now most people inside don't even realize that they're being led by the pendulum instead of their own will. If a person is lucky though, they find their place within a system and feel quite at home there. Now that adherent gives energy to the pendulum, which in return that pendulum provides the individual with an environment, financial security, and maybe even social recognition. Now, I could never belong to a corporate pendulum. That was not me. I was basically fired or left or something happened that always kicked me out after maximum 6 months. If a person ends up on a life path that doesn't support their growth and they're living under the control of a foreign pendulum, it can feel quite empty and lifeless, like, you know, working in the gulags, right? That's like the Russian working camps, hard labor and just like total misery. In this state, the pendulum becomes purely destructive. And whether they realize it or not, anyone caught in the pendulum's grip just loses their freedom and they're forced to live a life by its rules and reduced to a small cog in a larger machine. Why is it called a pendulum? The structure is referred to as a pendulum because the more people come into its force, i.e. we call it adherence, that feed it with the energy, the more powerfully that pendulum swings. And that pendulum, it swings at its own resonant frequency. Every pendulum has its own beat frequency. Think of it as its own identity, a specific rhythm that it operates on. Think of it like pushing this swing. If you push it at the right rhythm, it moves higher, right? You push it at the peak of when it's going back. That rhythm is called the resonant frequency. It is the natural frequency at which something vibrates the absolute strongest. And when you apply energy at that exact frequency, it absorbs it easily and the movement becomes much bigger. Two examples of resonant frequency is one, a tuning fork, where if you put one tuning fork and then another tuning fork nearby that is not of the same frequency, and you bang one tuning fork, that one barely vibrates, and you put a ping pong ball beside it, you won't see that ping pong ball move. But if they're the same frequency tuning forks, if I hit this one over here, this one, you'll see that ping pong ball move quite significantly. And so it's because they're tuning themselves to the same frequency, it's picking up on the energy and the vibrations that's coming from it. And another example is the ability to break a glass with your voice. When you're able to match the resonant frequency of the glass with your voice, that frequency is amplified and that glass shatters because of the energy. You're able to feed a pendulum your energy whenever your thoughts and your feelings match its energy. And you don't have to do it consciously. Most of our thoughts and our reactions actually happen automatically on a subconscious level. When your inner state aligns with the pendulum's rhythm, your energy flows to it without you ever even noticing. Now, we're not here to argue whether these are living entities or just energy forms and patterns. Ancient cultures would have called these forces spirits, and in a way that's very accurate. They behave like invisible beings that influence groups of people. But in transurfing, we use the word pendulum instead because it helps you see them without giving them some sort of mystical authority. And you stop treating them like conscious gods, sort of, and start seeing them as energetic structures that rise and grow and feed on your attention. And you understand that they just behave like an algorithm mechanically. What matters isn't what they are exactly. What matters is to recognize them and avoid getting pulled into their game unless it genuinely benefits you. The following are characteristics of a pendulum, kind of like an overview. First, a pendulum is an autonomous information-based energy structure that acts more like an algorithm than an entity with conscious intention. Meaning, no pendulum is gonna just pick on you because they like you specifically. You are doing something to attract a pendulum, and therefore it's just as mechanically easy to get rid of a pendulum. And so I've heard people being like, oh, pendulums really like me, as if it's like a mosquito who really enjoys, no, like it's not a bully that is specifically picking on you and no one else. And so they're automatic. It's just what they do, right? They're just trying to eat more and feed on energy. And whoever gives them their attention by resonating at their frequency is who they're gonna go after. By feeding on the energy of adherents and people, it increases the power of its sway. And like any being, any sort of entity, its main purpose is to expand. Its main purpose is to grow. And because it kind of herds us and farms on us, it's trying to attract as many followers as possible in order to source as much energy as possible. You would do the same thing. Same with me. A pendulum also always makes a contradistinction between a group of adherents and all other groups, meaning we are good, they are bad, we are better than they are, etc. Sports teams are like that, Democrats and Republicans, politics, religion, there's been many wars over religion, etc. A pendulum also always acts aggressively towards anyone who refuses to follow it, either attempting to win them over, meaning lure them in, or neutralize them in their position. So they'll either, if someone speaks against the pendulum, they'll discredit them in some sort of way, or they might get rid of them entirely. And so that can turn out very messy, of course. But you're talking about with really destructive type of pendulums. And finally, a pendulum hides behind masks and lofty ideas. It plays on people's feelings to justify its actions and to attract as many adherents as possible. One characteristic that I just mentioned is that you can always spot a pendulum because it's always battling with other pendulums, because it's always trying to gather as many adherents for their attention and their loyalty, because their only goal is to grab more followers as possible so it could eat and feed on more energy. The more aggressively a pendulum fights for its supporters, the more destructive it is and the more dangerous it becomes to personal life and freedom. Now, what's really interesting is that a pendulum is powered by both its supporters and by its opponents. It doesn't matter which side you're swinging the pendulum from. It only cares about engaging people in any way possible in order to occupy their thoughts and feed off of their energy and emotions and attention. And so it doesn't matter if you love Republicans or hate Republicans, you're feeding the same pendulum. The Israeli and Palestinian war is the exact same thing. I'm sorry to hate it. I'm probably going to receive a lot of fluff in the comments, but that's a thing. And you're going to have questions as to, well, what are we supposed to do? please be patient with me on this one. And I know these subjects are a little bit more sensitive, but I'm just here to express the mechanics of reality and what's happening. There's many more subjects that I could list off that are very sensitive to some people, and it's going to rub people the wrong way because these subjects are very close to their heart. I'll give you an example myself. During COVID, I got caught by the pendulum. I'm going to probably express this in another segment as well, how I got taken down a very tough, rough lifeline. I got caught by the pandemic pendulum, right? There's people who were really gung-ho about this and lockdowns and all the rules and that you had to follow the rules, and if you weren't following all of the rules, you were a grandma killer. And there were other people who were really against the restrictions and everything that was happening with the government's measures against its people. And I was someone who was against all of those restrictions. And I was trying to wake people up, and I got really wrapped up into that side. I was an opponent, right? And I got super wrapped up. I remember that I used to like literally argue with people nonstop on social media about we all need to wake up or else the government's going to continue to push and push and push. And I was in Canada at that time, and we had the longest restrictions. We had the most stiff and also the most ridiculous. It was insane. And I looked around and I was going crazy. I started having an eye twitch because of it. And the pendulum just kept taking my energy because I kept giving to it because I thought I was doing it for a good cause by waking people up, but I wasn't. Ultimately, I looked around and I saw people who didn't care either way, and I was like, wait, who's happier, me or them? And eventually I woke up and I finally released it and I said, enough is enough. A great example of a collective pendulum can be remembered in soccer games. I don't know if you guys ever seen the documentary on Netflix with David Beckham, right? He was playing in the World Cup for England, and he had a game. It was against Argentina. I can't remember if it was the finals or the semifinals, but it was an important game. I think all games in the World Cup are important. But I remember that there was an Argentinian player, and he was making a move, and David Beckham did something to cause a penalty kick. And what David Beckham did, he grabbed him or did something, I forget exactly, but basically it caused the guy to shoot a penalty kick and then kick out England. He was literally hated for years after that. Spat on, the paparazzi went crazy. People in England hated him, although he was a hero for them before. But what happens, why pendulums are kind of important, if a crowd that massive sends their hate onto someone, they could end up killing them. But what happens is that the pendulum absorbs that energy. Obviously, some of it still makes it to the individual, but it's the pendulum that absorbs most of that hate that is coming from the crowd. Same thing that could happen on the opposite side when you're sending so much, you could say, admiration towards your favorite idol, whether it's like Adele or Taylor Swift on stage. The pendulum is the one that soaks it up, and then some of it is still given to the performer on stage. And it's like in soccer and the sports stadiums, it gets like crazy hysteria. And the reason why people go hysterics in large groups is because of the pendulum. It looms over and it gets people like going. And you have psychiatry that tries to explain it through their own means, but at the end of the day, we know that energy is primary. And so we need to understand these things from an energetic perspective first before we go into the nitty-gritty of our sort of natural sciences. How do pendulums actually control us? Let's get into that a little bit because they are awesome at getting people to give them their energy willingly. Now, strong pendulums control people through strict rules and system. Think gangs, corporations, religions. Weaker ones rely on persuasions, promises, arguments to get what they want. And because they are energetic beings after all. They operate according to the natural laws of the universe. Pendulums will do whatever is necessary to grab people's attention and control their thoughts. But with modern media, their methods have become much more sophisticated, keeping people hooked onto, you guessed it, it used to be the TV, but now it's the smartphones. News and social media most often highlights negativity to stir people's emotions like fear and anger, which then feeds the cycle. These media outlets are massive pendulums that serve even bigger ones, pretending to inform while actually tuning people's minds to specific frequencies. I want you to imagine a group of grumpy old ladies, right? Sitting on a bench, just criticizing the government. Obviously, they're not adherents of it, they're opponents of the pendulum, but even opponents still feed the pendulum. They sit there and they talk about how much they hate the government, how inept it is, how corrupt, how stupid, and in so doing so, they are emitting intense thought energy at the frequency of the pendulum. Again, it does not matter which side you rock the pendulum from. It can use both positive and negative energy just as long as the energy is in resonance with its own. Pendulums know exactly how to lure you in with promises and goals and status and identities that sound meaningful in the moment, but that actually pull you further from true happiness and your highest lifeline. You might have a young man who joins the army who's looking for purpose but ends up losing his life. Or you might have a student that chases a respectable career, but it doesn't really fit them at all. Or you might have one that takes on a job for status, but they end up hating it or marry the wrong person because it seems acceptable. And in the end, they're stuck out living problems and paths that were never really truly theirs in the first place. One of the pendulum's favorite ways of gaining access to your energy is to prod you, to throw you off balance. And once you have lost your own sense of equilibrium, you tend to start to wobble at the same frequency of the pendulum and thereby enabling it to sway more strongly. Let's say gas prices go up again and you get annoyed. You complain, you talk about it with your friends, and this sort of reaction just feels normal, right? But that's exactly what the pendulum wants. It wants you to get worked up because it wants you sending out negative energy in a way that it matches its frequency, and the pendulum feeds on it, grows stronger, and then the situation for you gets even worse. Pendulums control you via puppet strings. Now, these puppet strings are attached to you via emotions. Okay? And fear is one of the most succulent of emotions to pendulums. It's the most ancient and one of the most powerful of human emotions. And then you also have anxiety and worry, and while it's weaker, it also keeps your focus locked in on the pendulum and amplifies its influence. Guilt is another really strong and powerful emotion for the pendulum to use because it's instilled in you since childhood, and guilty people are obedient and very easy to manipulate. This also contributes to a sort of sense of duty and continued guilt that kind of continues the ongoing cycle of submission. And by constantly prodding with these sort of emotions, pendulums continue to secure their flow of energy, keeping individuals under their control. These aren't the only emotions that pendulum use. You might be surprised at how long the laundry list is. It's really any emotion that sways and gets out of hand. Resentment, dissatisfaction, hatred, frustration, oppression, confusion, despair, regret, affection, admiration, idolization, adoration, delight, disappointment, pride, arrogance, contempt, disgust, etc. Now, this does not mean, hey, never feel an emotion again. You're still allowed to be human, just don't swing the wrecking ball way too hard. If you have small emotional waves, you kind of stay in control. It's all about amplitude. but huge emotional swings that are sustained, that's when the pendulum takes the wheel. And so, they don't really care if an emotion is positive or negative. They care about the intensity, because intensity is where the energy is. This section, we're going to explore how pendulums send us down very destructive and negative lifelines. And this is the real danger of a pendulum. It pulls you off of your true path and pushes your life into the direction that you never wanted to go and was never meant for you. And sometimes it can be quite painful and devastating. I'm going to explain to you guys in this section an example from my life. First, we're going to talk about how it works. Of course, everyone encounters negative news or incurs negative events in their life. These are provocations from the pendulums, but a person can interact with it or react to it in one of two ways. One is, if it's not too annoying, they sort of ignore it, they don't get too upset, they just it quickly fades, right? It might get a little bit frusty a little bit, but then it just quickly kind of dissolves on its own. But if this triggers some sort of fear or significant frustration or annoyance, it captures their mental energy and then it pulls them into the pendulum's influence. Now you might ask, so what if a person gives a tiny bit of their energy to a destructive pendulum? It's not as if it's going to affect their health. The truth is that the energy not only feeds the pendulum and takes energy from the individual, but it aligns with the corresponding sectors in the alternative space, and it might shift the person to a lifeline that's filled with more of what they want to avoid. We usually ignore news about accidents or disasters that don't directly affect us, right? It's over there, it's not here, it's somewhere else, imagine. It's not just on the screen, it doesn't happen in my life. Well, that's because when you hear such events, you're not on a lifeline where you're a victim, you're just a witness in here. However, if you engage with it deeply and you start to tell these stories and you discuss them with your friends and you dwell on them, you might, and that goes on for a long period of time, you might very well shift to lifelines where you become the victim instead of just a passive observer. If you see something that you do not like and you're afraid of it and you fear it coming into your life, the more you strongly desire to avoid something, the more likely it is that you will encounter it. To actively fight against what you don't want in your life is to make every effort that it remains or shows up in your life, right? When you're worried about bills and you want them to go away, that's when more bills pile up. When you want it to be a beautiful day and you desperately hope that it doesn't rain, that's when it thunders. When you begin to love to hate your job, that's when you get stuck in it, or you end up getting fired, unable to find something that truly inspires you. This is how this stuff works. You get what you actively fight against. This is why you always get what you do not want. The things that you fear, hate, or strongly dislike will keep showing up in your life because of the energy that you give them. Other things that you'd rather avoid don't appear because you're not emotionally invested in them. When you focus or react emotionally to what you do not want, you invite it into your reality. It goes like this. Where attention goes, energy flows. And where energy flows, that's where life or reality grows. Whether it is positive or whether it is negative, it does not matter. This is law. This is mechanics. You can change your entire life with your attention. And attention is the next lesson that we're going to go into. It is so simple, but is the hardest thing to practice, yet one of the most powerful things to practice and the most basic, necessary, fundamental things to practice to be able to choose the type of life you want to live. As you know, when you lock your energy to a specific frequency, you naturally shift to lifelines that match that path. Pendulums, though, if they lock your energy to a specific frequency, it amplifies the effect, and no action is needed to move to undesired life paths. Simply thinking negatively and fueling it with your emotion is enough to make that shift happen. The first step is the negative focus, right? When you keep thinking about the negative things, your energy starts matching that same negative frequency. And then you slowly, slightly, very slightly move one shade over. You shift the lifelines slightly. And once your energy aligns with that negativity, you naturally move towards more negative events potentially happen. You experience more of what you focus on. And as you get pulled into the story, as you slightly move one shade over, more stories of the things that you do not want to happen begin to occur, and you react to it more. You start paying attention to it more. You go deeper and get pulled down into the negative pattern more, and this creates a spiral of similar events that keep showing up. Then you begin having selective perception. Your focus narrows and it starts only noticing these negative events everywhere. You start talking about it with others, and then it makes it feel even more real and constant. As that is happening, the pendulum is continuing to pull you. The system or that negativity, that force, it gets stronger and it captures more of your attention, and you give it more and it pulls you deeper and deeper until you're no longer just a passive observer. You're now that inside of the negative event that you were actively trying to avoid. You have now shifted onto that negative lifeline. This is called an induced transition. I'll give you my own personal story on how this happened for me. So I've always been kind of interested in the truth, right? It kind of goes with the territory. And so everyone has their own. I'll give you my own personal story and anecdote with getting an induced transition by the I'll give you my own story of my own personal induced transition to very negative lifelines. So again, it's happened during COVID. And as I mentioned before, I was an opponent of the restrictions and the government lockdown and all of the other measures that we're taking on. In Canada, we had what was called the trucker protests. I believe that's what it was called, where all the big truckers came to Ottawa to block the capital. Ottawa is the capital of Canada. And I saw the propaganda happening in our news, but we went there, me and my two other friends, because we wanted to see what was happening in real time. The Prime Minister at the time said it was going to be a very fringe movement. And they were kind of controlling the narrative. It was crazy times at that during those events. And so we went to Ottawa on the first day. We drove there the night before, got a hotel literally on the corner. I could see the whole parade from our hotel room. We obviously went to the streets. And so it was -40 that day. It was like the middle of February. And I'm not gonna go into the whole thing, but like it got massive. It was huge. It was like the Burning Man for truckers and the pandemic. People were dancing in the street. There was a huge party. People were giving out food. It was beautiful. It felt like this crazy release of energy because while the media controlled their narrative and said that this was going to be a fringe movement and other people didn't think like them and they wanted the restrictions, etc., it felt like a release for all the people who were thinking in other ways, right? And I remember even having tears coming down my eyes because I could feel the energy in the streets. It got so freezing that at one point we just needed to go midday. We had to go into our hotel room and just like warm up a little bit. And I could literally see, we had the corner, I could see the whole parade. I could see the center of where it was all happening because we had this a corner hotel room. And we turned on the news because we were curious what the news was going to say. And we have the local news, it was like CP24 or something like that. And we're seeing them saying that no one has showed up. And they're pointing cameras from a previous time in a sector of the street that I could see with my very own eyes. And I was looking from the TV to the street, seeing the lies and the propaganda directly, and I could see what's happening in real time with my own eyes. And so when that happens, you always know that there's propaganda, and you kind of think it happens in other places. And people have become more aware that it's now happening in the Western world. But something inside of you switches when you kind of always known it was happening, but when you see it with your own eyes, when you can see reality with your own eyes and you see the lies on TV, something inside of you goes, oh, it's really real. And so that put me on a path of obsessively trying to understand how deep this rabbit hole goes. And I'm not gonna bore you with the details. It gets pretty crazy, insane, but it's not healthy. And so the more I began to find out, the more, and I'll just be brief, the more evil I saw within this and the more orchestrated I saw this to be, and the deeper I went down the rabbit hole in every respect. I knew I had to get out of the matrix in like, the more wider spiritual sense, but now like all of the systems, everything I knew about history, everything I knew about the world started to crumble. And that was necessary for me, right? It was part of the process. But I got sort of hooked into the story of what was gonna happen next. And part of my story that I was going down was that there's gonna be this whole crazy financial collapse, et cetera, et cetera. And then I began with that seed in my mind. I had certain investments made, and I began taking money out of those investments. I began moving from a state of fear. Remember me saying I began having, like literally I had physical twitches because of this negativity that I was wrapped into. I was wrapped in the pendulum's vortex. And me taking money out at that age, it basically blew out my savings at that time and dwindled out to very minuscule amounts. I also then had to move out of my apartment at the time where I was living, and it just sent me down 2 years of a very rough period. On the flip side of this is that we know that any seemingly negative period in life can be flipped over to be something very positive. You can turn something negative into it being the most necessary and important period in your life if you treat it for what it is and you view it as positive and you take advantage of a crisis. And so that's what I also did. And so it's really interesting when you think about these negative scenarios or going down a very rough path. They actually can be some of the best things that happen for you, but you don't have to go down a or get pulled into an induced transition by a pendulum down a very destructive path in order to have certain experiences or certain growth. I'm just saying everything can be flipped for it to be positive. No matter which sort of detour or whatever black hole you find yourself in, even if you're in a black hole right now, remember this: nothing matters, only state of being matters. And no matter how deep and horrendous and dark this black hole is, you can get out of it like that. Okay? You can change your life radically. Transurfing will teach you how. So the moral of the story is to not let negative information in your life. And you have to intentionally ignore it and deprive it of attention and to not engage with it with interest. Meaning, I have stopped going down the truther aisle. I peek in once in a while, but I don't get involved anymore. I've deleted all these sort of accounts off of my phone. I don't go down too many weird rabbit holes anymore. And if I do, I really know how to kind of be detached. And when I feel my energy sort of getting captured a little bit, I just turn it off and I turn the other way and I focus on more positive things. Because life is not about reacting to our world. We are creating at all times, and you can create anything you want in this life. So it's really about turning your back on reality and turning into the kingdom of God, which is within yourself, within your own imagination. In order to remove the unwanted things from your life, you must break free from the various different pendulums within it and begin cutting yourself off from all of the negative news and also provocations. And also, To free yourself from the pendulum, you have to learn how to either defeat it or stop its sway. And we're going to explain both of these methods because it's not just about news. You have people that also become pendulums. You are a pendulum, you have certain interactions, you have life. You're in a jellyfish aquarium filled with pendulums. They're unavoidable. It's just learning how to interact with them and not being caught by their sway and involved in their influence. First, we need to understand that fighting with a pendulum never, ever, 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 ever. Do I need to continue? Do I need to continue to embarrass myself with these horrible dance? I used to be kind of good. Actually, one time I won an award at a dance, school dance thing. Okay, I don't want to embarrass myself anymore. Get the point. Never ever fight with a pendulum. Never fight with a pendulum. So, when you resist or you argue with a pendulum, you're only going to give it your energy. And the only real way to weaken a pendulum is to stop engaging with it completely. Because the more you fight with it, the stronger it gets. It's one of those monsters, if you remember in like cartoons, where if you shot it with bombs or like energy, it just absorbs all of that and it just makes the monster stronger because it just absorbs whatever you throw at it. That's the same thing with the pendulum. So you can't fight with it. Also, pendulums kind of belong in this world as much as you do. They make up the structure of our world. And so you have no right really to judge or change anything. All you can do is really accept things. You accept them the way you accept paintings in an art gallery. If you don't like what you see, you would not demand that they be torn down. You simply go into another exhibit and enjoy something that you would prefer to experience instead of, fighting with the owner, screaming that you demand that they take down this mockery of art. No, you just walk away and find something else you could enjoy because life is infinitely multifaceted. We had mentioned at the beginning that transurfing is all about learning how to choose. And in order to learn how to choose, you must first learn how to decline. And so most people, they have a vague sense of what they want, but they know exactly what they don't want. You don't know how much time I've heard from people that they don't know what they want with their life. They don't know what direction they want to go, but they know exactly what they want to avoid. And by focusing your attention on the things that you want to avoid, those are the things that you receive in your life. The reason that I say that is in order for us to properly decline something, we have to first acknowledge that it exists. Now, acceptance does not mean agreeing with it or letting it into our life. It just means recognizing that it has the right to exist. You notice it and you let it pass on and then you move on. It's much more powerful than getting caught up or reacting or trying to fight it. If you try to pretend that something doesn't exist or no, I don't ever want it into my life, that's literally asking for it in your life. To actually eradicate something from your life, you just have to stop thinking about it and pass it by with indifference and it will just disappear. When you think about the things you do not want, you just attract them further into your life. I want you to imagine someone who detests tomatoes. That's not your boy right here. I love tomatoes, so succulent. I could eat tomatoes all day, a little bit of salt on a piece of toast, beautiful. But imagine someone who does not like tomatoes. Instead of simply not paying tomatoes any sort of attention whatsoever, it actually irritates that person that tomatoes even exist at all. Now, on a material level, right, they get annoyed every time they see a tomato and then they openly express that disgust of, oh, I hate tomatoes. On an energetic level, however, that person is basically stuffing their mouth with tomatoes, stuffing their pockets with tomatoes, living in a tomato house with tomato sofas, with tomato wallpaper that smells like tomatoes, while they constantly complain and talk about how much they detest tomatoes. It sounds kind of insane. What the person doesn't realize is that they could simply delete tomatoes from their existence or their experience in life. This brings us to this wonderful line. Remember it. You always get what you love to hate. It doesn't matter whether you love or hate something. If you keep thinking about it, you're tuning into its frequency and your focus connects you to that energy, and you end up in a version of reality where that thing shows up even more. Where your attention goes, energy flows. Where energy flows, reality grows. And so this brings us to the first tactic with defeating a pendulum. If you want to eradicate something from your life, all you have to do is just stop thinking about it and pass it by with indifference. But most people don't do that. They resist it. They continue to hate it. They continue to give it its attention, and then they just get more and more and more of it. What you have to do is just ignore it. Eliminate it from your life by ignoring it and not trying to avoid it. There is a difference between ignoring and avoiding. When you try to avoid something, it means that you have let it into your personal space, but now you're actively trying to get rid of it. To ignore something means you do not react to it and consequently do not experience its presence in your space. And the pendulum cannot hook into you if you are empty. Battling with a pendulum is absolutely futile because it just supplies it with more energy, and so the key to defeating a pendulum is to refuse to engage with it at all. Imagine that you're a radio. If your day-to-day life is like waking up every day and listening to a program that you hate, all you have to do is tune in to a different frequency. This is a huge illusion because putting up protection or putting on protective armor and avoiding the world actually requires huge amounts of energy to support this kind of field. Isolating yourself from the world creates constant tension. Your defensive energy ends up just vibrating at the same frequency as the pendulum that you're resisting in the first place, which is actually what the pendulum wants. And it doesn't matter if you give your energy willingly or unwillingly, the pendulum still feeds on it. True protection from the pendulum lies in ignoring it. If you remain empty and indifferent, the pendulum has nothing to hook onto. Its energy will simply pass by and dissipate without affecting you. There's this beautiful quote from A Course in Miracles that I came across when working with that body of work that I absolutely love and wanted to share with you. In my defenselessness, my safety lies. As mentioned, a pendulum's main goal is to hook as many people as possible and feed on their energy. If you ignore it and don't give it attention, it loses interest in you and moves on to more succulent, receptive victims. However, there are situations where it's not easy to ignore a pendulum. For example, you're at work and your boss comes to you and demands something of you, and it's a bit unreasonable, and an outright refusal or an open defense of yourself would entail you actually losing energy because both approaches mean that you're now fighting with the pendulum. You can, however, act in a way where you're willing to play the pendulum's game as long as you remain aware of the fact that you're just pretending. This brings us to the second tactic of defeating a pendulum, and that is pretending to play the pendulum's game. It's a lot like practicing Aikido. You don't resist the force coming your way, you redirect it. You move with that energy until that energy dissolves. And so if your boss comes to you with a bunch of extra work and dumps it on your desk, you wake up, you stay aware, you stay calm, you listen, you agree in the moment, you let the frustration and the energy settle, and then you come to them and you ask, hey, I want your opinion. I love the way that you do things. How could this be done more efficiently? And you'll find out that by going with the flow instead of reacting emotionally, you are the one that stays in control, and most often than not, you'll have the pendulum lose interest, and then the tension fades, and you're able to either get through it or the situation sort of transforms on its own because the energy has then dissipated from the pendulum and something new and more flowy emerges. This is like taking the wise and famous words from the martial artist Bruce Lee. Be like water. Make its way through cracks. Do not be assertive, but adjust to the object, and you shall find a way around or through it. If nothing within you stays rigid, outward things will disclose themselves. Now we're going to learn how to stop pendulums, because there's some situations where the pendulum cannot be defeated, meaning it can't be ignored or escaped. If you ever find yourself in a situation that you know will unfold according to a set script, you have to do something surprising. It doesn't matter what that thing is as long as it does not fit within the standard script. If you do that, you will stop the pendulum swing. But as long as you are acting out in a prepared script, you're effectively agreeing to the pendulum's rules and you're giving away your energy at its resonance frequency. But if your vibration differs significantly from that of the pendulum, you create an interference pattern which stops and disturbs the pendulum's beat. An amazing example of this is the following prank that I saw on YouTube. As soon as I learned about this, this is the first thing that came to mind. Now, I'm not a fan of these prank videos, but it's an amazing example, particularly when it comes to a pendulum about if you're about to get into a fight, right? So what these guys did, these kids, these hooligans, they basically went to rougher neighborhoods and they antagonized individuals into a fight. Right? And so then the standard script was for them about to scrap. They're about to throw bows and the other was about to throw bows. But the antagonizers, as the fight was about to begin, they pulled down their pants. This is something that goes completely against the script of a fight, right? Particularly in these rougher neighborhoods. Either the people who were fighting were like literally broke down in a laugh, or they were running away, or both at the same time. And so this is a perfect example of going against a standard script, which completely dissolves the pendulum's beat. And so a wonderful quality to have in this situation is a sense of humor and imagination, which ends up being very helpful in stopping the pendulum swing and can very much transform what's something that can be irritating, scary, or frustrating into a game. Another great example of how to use this is in relationships. So again, like people are their own pendulum. And so when you're dealing with an individual, instead of thinking of them as an individual, think of them as there's a pendulum above them and they're a pendulum that is trying to feed on the energy that's about to occur. And it's the energy of frustration or the anger or the fear, whatever that energy is. And so if you can do something that either calms it down or just keeps it from eating off of the energy that's expected. And so something in a relationship that I've seen before that is fantastic is, say you're about to get into a fight with your significant other. You know how this is gonna go. You're gonna start saying some crazy things and you're gonna end up regretting it, and you guys are gonna separate for a significant period of time and it's gonna be awkward, etc. But if you were able to wake up in time and suggest that you finish the argument in the bathtub, then that completely dissipates things. And you can use a rubber ducky, but it's not necessary. It just calms the entire pendulum thing down because it's completely against the script. Another awesome tactic that I've heard is if you both complete the argument or the conversation on your bellies. And so when you're on your belly staring at each other, it's really hard to like speak from a place of frustration and anger because it's so silly. I've also used the tactic of literally not saying anything. So if someone's trying to antagonize you into a fight, they might be doing it subconsciously, is simply like opening up your hands and giving them a hug this goes against the script, just literally not feeding the energy in any kind of way whatsoever. So you meet it with absolutely nothing. And then this stops, this stops the swing completely. I've also had moments of where people came at me with aggression and I started howling at the top of my lungs, literally, oh, that worked wonders. But you can't overdo these things until you push it up on the other end and you're the one that becomes the pendulum. So just a word of caution there. Now, here's the thing that you have to remember. The hard part is to stay calm and awake and aware. You have to wake up in the moment and stay as calm as possible. In those moments, all you want to do is just like vent or snap, but that's exactly what the pendulum wants. It's trying to get a reaction out of you so it could feed on your energy, and so you can't take the bait. The pendulum ultimately works like an energy vampire that's living off of your negative emotions. So next time something annoys you, like whatever it might be, someone trying to push your buttons or antagonize you, just pause and notice it. The more you practice staying calm and awake instead of reacting, the stronger you ultimately become in those situations. And it's amazing, and you feel so wonderful and powerful when you're actually able to spot a pendulum and not get wrapped up in its game. You've probably noticed that when you react to something with frustration or irritation or anger, things only seem to get worse. And that's because the pendulum in that moment is gaining momentum and your reaction is what's keeping it swinging. And it's extremely hard to stop when you're in the middle of that swing. And so you have to stay awake and aware before you get hooked in the first place. And it's so important to do the opposite of what they're asking you to do, right? To get as irritated, to get as frustrated or angry, you have to stay calm and even respond in totally unexpected ways. And so when something annoying happens, just smile or laugh instead of getting upset. The moment you stop feeding the reaction of the pendulum, that's when it loses power and the situation just quickly settles. When you're able to catch pendulums before they hook you, it's an amazing thing. This is such a powerful idea, and soon as you practice this, you'll be able to catch pendulums before they hook you. It's amazing for relationships and all sorts of other things in your life. You can stop arguments before they happen because now you realize what is about to occur, and you're no longer seeing the person as a person. That sounds weird. You want to see them as a pendulum, because if you see them as a person, when they say something to you, oh, you're getting a little bit chubby, or that shirt's feeling a little bit tight, or that's the reason why your father left you. Like, when they say things like that are kind of crazy, and you see them as your significant other, you're lost in the script, right? You're lost in this movie. You're like, how could you, of all people, say that to you? But when you realize that that's a pendulum at work, you go, I know who it is. I know what's happening right now. And when you're able to get good at this, it's absolutely amazing because you're seeing literally energy at work. It looks like real life, the physical world, the reflection, but it's really, you begin to see the energy at play, and you also begin to feel it. And when you're able to stop from giving your energy away from the pendulum, you're now taking your energy back from it, and the pendulum is the one feeding you, and that is an amazing feeling. Now we're going to speak to the structure of our world and pendulums' roles in it. Basically, the structures of our world is run by pendulums. The reason we have our world play out the way that it does, our society, our history, etc., is all because of pendulums. And it ultimately comes down to the pendulum rule. Do as I do. Change yourself and betray yourself. You see, every living being has its own purpose, and the drive to fulfill that purpose is what fuels evolution. But the true goal of any living being, whatever its nature is, can only be achieved in its natural habitat. Any structure bends the goals of its members towards its own interests. You can see this everywhere in nature and in society. If you look at the plants that we've domesticated, they no longer grow according to their own natural purpose. They grow the way that we breed and shape them to. The same thing happens with animals. Wolves became dogs, and now most dog breeds couldn't survive a day in the wild. Cows are now bred with slow, gentle livestock with no natural defenses. Once a living being is shaped by a structure, it slowly loses touch with its original instincts and purpose. It stops living for itself and starts living for the system that controls it, and humans are no different. When they fall under the influence of the structure or pendulums, they forget their own path and unconsciously serve the goals of the structure. Take the example of wild deer. They have more than enough to deal with. The problem of defending themselves from wolves and predators and bears, bringing up offspring, foraging for food, dealing with family relationships, the group hierarchy, as well as simply enjoying life. Now look at the life of a herd of cows in the structure of a farm. Life could hardly be more miserable. By providing them with food and shelter, the man has solved all sorts of problems for these animals, but in exchange, they have sacrificed their goals for the master who determines how and for what purpose and for how long they live. The life of a herd in a structure of a farm could hardly be any more miserable. By providing them with food and shelter, man has solved all sorts of problems for these animals. But in exchange, these cows have now sacrificed their own purpose and their own goals. And now the master, the farmer, determines how and for what purpose. Are you going to be leather? Are you going to be beef? Are you going to be milk, etc.? And how long they should live for. It's the same thing with us. It is similar to man selling his soul to the devil, is it not? As I said, man is no different. We created these structures, and now these structures have enslaved us. We have lost our purpose and to understand our true goals. We can't think of what our life might look like outside of these structures that we created, and our lives have been reduced to just the production, the buying, and selling of various different products. At the head of any structure, there's a superstructure pendulum, which has no interest in the products at all and purely focuses on actively developing the structure that produces them. And why is that? Just look at our digital products. There's this amazing quote from the documentary The Social Dilemma. If the product is free, you're not the customer, you are the product. These digital products, of course it spreads information, and that's a beautiful thing. But we have lost our touch with them. They are now products of our attention. These are the products in which the pendulum use to extract energy from us and now implant ideas within our minds and continue to fill out the structure's goals instead of those of our own. At the end of the day, energy is the ultimate product. People buy items either for comfort or pleasure, and others even buy certain things to cause harm. But both the negative and the positive generate energy, which is what pendulums feed on. And it goes beyond material goods, because the true currency is energy, and pendulums control this market. Individuals do get a small share, but the bulk always goes to the pendulums. The scariest component for all of this is the informational one, because this creates very fertile ground for pendulums. The more people that think and behave in the same way, the more powerful a pendulum becomes and the more power it can exert on our world. To gain control of the populace, you don't have to place them in container pods with tubes stuck into them like in the Matrix. It's enough to create an all-encompassing informational network, because the people will automatically take their place in their cells. The structure subtly shapes each person's thoughts and actions, making them believe that they're acting freely. In reality, true freedom is absent because the structure dictates the script, and each individual plays a role that's assigned to them in a pre-imposed narrative. I know it looks like everyone is free to do what they want, and we are declared to have some sort of freedom, right? Freedom, America. But the only thing is, we can only want the things that coincide with the interests of the structure. The structure teaches us to want what it needs us to want. And so it goes back to the pendulum rule. Do as I do, change yourself, and betray yourself. The process of controlling individual will unfolds naturally like ice crystals forming as water freezes. Pendulums lack conscious intention, so their network grows and self-organizing, resembling parasitic plant colony spreading across the earth. Now, this idea may seem a bit unsettling or amusing or even like science fiction. However, reality often takes on forms that surpass even the most imaginative works of fiction in their stark realism. Let's not delude ourselves with the idea that man is a rational being and would never permit themselves to become enslaved in such a way. Human awareness is already low, and the structure is steadily diminishing it even further. And to achieve total control, the structure aims to unite everyone under a single information field, a process that actually is advancing quite quickly and effectively, and humans are only small steps away from sealing the deal. And you can look again at sci-fi. In the Terminator and all other sci-fi movies, you see in the dystopian world, you see the world basically being run by one, like in the Terminator, Skynet, or just several mega corporations, and this is already happening in our world. And remember, pendulums battle with other pendulums in order to acquire more adherents. And so you have only 10 major companies that dominate almost every large food and beverage brand worldwide. Consolidation of companies is happening at an exponential rate right now. You also have the four horsemen in tech, which is Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. There's also only 3 firms that are top shareholders in more than 40% of all of the US publicly traded companies. It's BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. And guess who owns them? Each other. They each have shares within each other's companies. So, what can be done? Just as a side note, I don't like guns, and I don't want to promote them, but I just thought this image was really cool, so I wanted to use it. It turns out if you consume the products of civilization, you're being shepherded by it. Some people have attempted to escape civilization by forming communities in wilderness, and their success is sort of debatable because modern humans have a hard time completely detaching themselves from civilization, although it is wise to kind of reduce your reliance on the harmful products and instead try to embrace nature's gifts as much as possible. For example, you could create a family plot with your own garden and plant your own vegetables. And the biggest advantage of this is like you get to create your own rules here. But if you live in a city, you could try and transition to as much organic and natural foods as possible, but this also requires awareness because the supermarket apple is tailored to the structure and has its own health issues, of course. But there's always going to be sort of detoxes and cleanses that you can do to still thrive and succeed in this very toxic pendulum-like world. Everyone has their own path, and it's just essential to be awake enough to choose what resonates best with you. There is absolutely nothing wrong with making the most of the benefits of civilization as long as you do not become addicted or dependent. You can tell a free individual because of their awareness. All you have to do is wake up and become aware of what is really happening. Run away from the slaughterhouse and return to the wild of your soul. We cannot get rid of pendulums because they make up the structure of our world, but we also, we don't really want to. After all, It's pendulums that make our dreams come true. Until now, we've only focused on how to free ourselves from pendulums, but it's also possible to benefit from them. There's this wonderful line in the book that I love: stars are born, but it's pendulums that light them up. Ultimately, pendulums is a group of individuals, and for any successful idea, whether it's a business idea, whether it's growing a social media channel, whether you're in a band, whether you want to become a movie star and sell movies, if you want to succeed in this structure and in this society, you need to have people who love your work, right? And people who are tuned to the same idea or thought or movement of any kind is ultimately a pendulum. Transurfing is a pendulum. And so you want to be able to learn how to harness pendulums, because it's pendulums that make you a true star within this structure. There's no getting around the fact that we all have to live and work in one structure or another. It's simply a question of whether the structure deprives us of our dreams or helps you realize them. Now let's not get it twisted. You can't tame or control a pendulum, just like you can't control an ocean's wave, but you can ride it. After all, we are transurfers. Pun intended right there. That was kind of lame, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. Have you ever wondered why people make toast with meals and drinks? It's not just tradition. People back in the day understood alcohol was a spirit, right? That's why they call them spirits. There's an energy that's associated with them. That's why people feel like they're getting taken over when they drink. The thing is, alcoholic drinks, it's not free energy. It's energy on credit. That's why we get hangovers when we drink. Alcohol, the pendulum will give you a bit of energy, but what you have to give back is all of that energy plus interest. That's why the first drink is always the best, and then it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's why you have people who become homeless because of it, is because they kept draining the bank. They didn't give time for their energy bank to refill. And so you have to be very careful when working with these types of pendulums. When I'm pointing this, I don't mean marker pendulums, I mean alcoholic pendulums. It's simple. When you drink to escape sorrow, life will feel even heavier. If you drink in joy and celebration and find reasons to celebrate, life will amplify that feeling of excitement. And so if you mix drinking with fear and anxiety, life will bring you just more fear. The pattern applies every single time. When a person focuses their thoughts with intention, they align themselves with the lifeline that matches that intention. And so when you use the energy of a pendulum like alcohol, the pendulum can't activate outer intention, but it could amplify your intention. So that's basically what people are doing. The qualities of energy from a pendulum creditor is actually quite negative, but a person with their goodwill can actually shift the polarity to something more positive. And so a toast is not just an empty ritual, it's a declaration of intention. Now, don't think you can use alcohol to turn your desires into reality, because it's a double-edged sword. The bigger the boost, the higher the cost. And drugs are even riskier. Manipulating pendulum energy this way is neither reliable nor achievable for many people. But I want to make you aware of this stuff, right? Because black magic kind of works in the same way. It works in accordance with the same principle. An evil magician or a brujo, calls on dark powers in order to exploit their energy and strengthen their hostile intention. It's never lucrative in any respect to get credit from a pendulum. However, if you do end up doing so, it's essential that you stick to the following rule. When you are dangling on a pendulum's hook, think of only the positive. Never let negative thoughts of worry, fear, or despair take over when you're receiving an energy boost from a pendulum, because it only amplifies those feelings. This idea actually goes back to tea ceremonies, right? And so You're saying a prayer before the onset of the drinking the tea, which is receiving energy from a pendulum, a very small one. It's very tiny, but it's still receiving energy from a pendulum. And it's the same thing when it comes to saying a prayer or giving thanks or gratitude before a meal, for the meal to be good for our bodies, to be good for the people. You're setting an intention, right? And this custom goes back eons. People kind of have lost the reason why we do these things, but it's all because we're receiving energy from a pendulum and we want it to direct its polarity to the positive. Of course, when it comes to meal and tea ceremonies and chewing gum even, those are very minor pendulums. But when you're talking about more riskier ones like drugs and alcohol, playing with a pendulum is extremely risky and unpredictable because no one has the ability to possess unshakable superhuman will, right? Essentially, this is not a game. It is a dance with a shadow. A pendulum is an invisible, cold, merciless shadow. It has no awareness, no intention, no heart, no mind. It doesn't feel, it doesn't love, it doesn't care. You can't beat a pendulum no more than you can outrun your own shadow. It watches your reactions. It knows your habits. It never gets tired. You can't defeat it, and trying to fight it is pointless. In order to initiate your own game, you have to be yourself. Your personal game is shaping your own reality at your own discretion, and only you can do it. You just have to claim the privilege, and only you can give away or deprive yourself of your own privilege. This has to be understood. Again, stars are born, but it's pendulums that light them up. When it comes down to it, popularity and fashion are always created by pendulums. Why else would people simultaneously desire the same item en masse? Two amazing examples can be expressed through the massive success of the Beatles and ABBA, because they did not invent something entirely new or groundbreaking. Disco and rock, both two genres that they were known for, were already pioneered by other non-famous musicians. Their global fame can be explained by the fact that they aligned perfectly with powerful pendulums of their times, trends in music and culture that propelled them to worldwide recognition. I'm not going to go into their stories in this video right now because it's already long enough, but if you do your own research, you'll see that patterns emerge from both stories. First, popularity follows a wave-like cycle. It begins with a long period of anonymity during which a small but loyal fan base forms. Then comes a brief rise followed by a quieter phase as if the wave is retreating to gather strength. And then finally, a powerful force or surge of widespread success erupts. Over time, the wave fades as new pendulums rise, pushing the old ones into the background. Every era has its own unique vibe, sound, and style, its own charisma. A new era doesn't just happen and appear on its own, it's brought into existence by the collective intention of the people, and the pendulum then anchors and amplifies this shared intention. And this is also why long-lasting pop stars need to reinvent themselves and transform to adapt to the new era or be pushed into anonymity and non-existence, right? And this is also why Taylor Swift has been on top of her game for so long and has such a long cult-like following. She's always transforming, which makes the Swifties pendulum always have her back. And funny enough, she actually just completed her Eras tour just about a year ago. The way it works is that it starts with a small group of fans, each thinking, I like this. Their collective energy forms a pendulum that synchronizes their thoughts into, we like this. In the alt space, there are sectors where everyone likes this. The group's united intention moves reality towards these sectors, and over time, as more people join, the pendulum gains power. Once critical mass is reached, the shared intention fully manifests into reality, giving the era its unique charisma. Once critical mass is reached, the shared intention fully manifests in reality, giving the era its unique charisma shaped by the collective energy of the adherents. Now that you understand how trends are born, you have to embrace your right to be unapologetically yourself without worrying about the rest of the world. This is the only way to share your unique individuality with the world. Pendulums resist uniqueness, but will have no choice but to make you a star if you chart your own course. You have to stop chasing others and walk your own path. When you lead, pendulums will follow. Your soul's unique qualities make you capable of setting trends. A special space in the alternatives is waiting for you. All you have to do is step into it and declare your intention. This brings us to the end of the class on pendulums. I hope this knowledge brings you great fortune, or at least helps you from stepping on the wrong life path. In the next class, we're going to be doing attention, awareness and attention, the simplest, yet the most difficult, yet the most powerful thing when it comes to manifesting your desired reality. It all starts with attention. Attention is your foundation. If you don't have your attention, you don't have your soul. So I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Thank you again so very much. God bless.